Happy New Year. Good afternoon, and welcome to another installment of our ongoing Nonprofit Leadership and Engagement series. I am Joanne Nazer, the Nonprofit Leadership and Engagement Manager at the Washington County Community Foundation. Thank you for joining us today to learn from our content experts about nonprofits and AI. I'm so excited about this session. It is my honor to introduce Dr. Michael Skirpin. I could use this whole hour talking about his achievements, but I won't. Suffice it to say that Mike is a professor in Carnegie Mellon University's Software and Societal Systems Department, and he and some colleagues developed Community Forge in Wilkinsburg, which focuses on advancing an equitable economy. Thanks so much for presenting today, Mike.
Thanks, Joan. Can everybody confirm that you can hear me? Okay, good. So I'm gonna get started, and I'm just gonna also ask and tell people that as we get into this, I'm gonna do a quick poll. So if you have a device, it's good maybe here at the beginning to have it close. Some of you might just be listening or something like that, because we are going to ask you to just give us a light interaction here. So just wanted to give you a heads up for that. Um, so today we're really gonna try and give a little bit of education and a little bit of opportunity and assessment for how AI, this new hype phase we're in, we'll talk about, is affecting everyone, but can be utilized in the nonprofit sector in particular. Just as a quick introduction, which Joan already gave plenty. You don't need to know too much about me besides maybe that I have some credentials to talk about these things. I am a professor at Carnegie Mellon with a shared appointment in software and societal systems and electrical and computer engineering. While my PhD is in a technical field, it was from computer science. My dissertation actually focused on ethics and communication across different stakeholder groups. And so that was policymakers, members of the public, and students. Thus, what I've ended up focusing on is actually ethics pedagogy in this kind of technical frame. I have some technical background around auditing and development, but a lot around community empowerment in the public sphere and how they're processing and utilizing technology and trying to align it with public good. I also have a service background where I'm the executive director of Community Forge in Wilkinsburg, as Joan mentioned. We're doing a variety of things around community development, specifically social capital, working on accessible economic pathways, well-being, and importantly to here, technology empowerment. I can leave the rest up here for you all and you can review the slides. But I have done a variety of things in tech consulting and worked with government stakeholders for over a decade now, and as well as having creative pursuits such as playwriting and sci-fi writing, all sort of in the same branch and vein of trying to get people to think about the ethics of technology. So hopefully my guidance, I can't claim I know every answer, and I can't claim that I also really can predict the future of any of this stuff with AI, but hopefully I can guide a lot of you with my experience. I'm also going to just quickly state that two of my colleagues are here with me, both to listen, but also hopefully join and chip into Q&A. Syed Chowdhury, who's works at the CMU Library, is Associate Dean for Digital Infrastructure. He's also the founder and director of the Open Forum for AI. And Vince Shaw from CMU's Dietrich College, who is an associate dean there, doing actually so many things in Dietrich College that I would have a hard time naming them all. But he's also the technical lead for the Open Forum for AI. And the three of us have really, over the past year, formed a great partnership where we all have a very similar framework and set of goals around trying to help the public sphere and the broader community really feel empowered by AI, feel educated, and sort of avoid as much of the snake oil that's out there as possible. And while we're also building things, which you might learn a little bit about as we get going. They're here. Do you guys just want to I think if you guys chirp up, maybe your box will pop up. You just want to say hi so people can see you're on the call, and then
Hi, I'm Vince Shaw. Nice to meet everybody and look forward to answering any questions and chatting with you all.
I'm Sai Chaudhary. Also, same. Thank you for hosting us. Really looking forward to chatting along with you.
Perfect. Thank you guys. So they'll hopefully engage with Q&A, but we'll move through because as you'll see, we have a pretty dense agenda. I will say that I think we can all stay for maybe 10 minutes after the 1 o'clock. So if people have burning questions, we can quickly get to them. I will have to jet off not too long after because of teaching, but I have reserved just a little bit of time after with an expectation that things might run close. So our goals today is really improve your guys' literacy, right, on this function and capabilities. Have some technical literacy that you're walking away from. I really believe you can gain that literacy. It's nothing to be afraid of. And I also think it's important to have that kind of mindset so that you can go into trying to answer questions for yourself, as well as trying to evaluate uses with a know-how of what the technology is really doing and not like a magical thinking mindset. We want to be specific about where we think nonprofits and kind of generally the NGO space, how they could do good with AI and how it could help them. And ideally give you guys enough of a critical understanding that you can, not fall for pitfalls or potentially, as I said, snake oil that often comes from just people misunderstanding the nature of the technology. So we're going to start by addressing the moment we're in and move through to like looking at the opportunities that exist and get understanding of the nature of the technology, look at some specific notable innovations that relate to these use cases that you can hopefully exploit and use for your own. And then connect that back to how like snake oil gets sold if you don't understand these use cases. And then just give a little bit of like where we could go from here, how you could get deeper with us, or what you might even want to invest in or be thinking about or looking for going forward. And we'll leave a little time for Q&A. So as I promised, we're going to just do a really quick poll, which will be a great way. Once you're on the page I'm going to give you, it'll help us even in Q&A be really effective. So I got just 3 quick questions, and how you engage with this poll is I'm using a website called menti.com, www.menti.com. You don't need any account or anything. It's all anonymous, and it's just related to this chat. So it's just a way for us to get live information from those who are listening. The code, which is at the top of the screen here, is 28034609. When you go to menti.com, it's going to ask you to enter a code. So we're just going to ask maybe 3 quick questions and see if we can just understand the room, which will help me know where to hover and spend more time, maybe versus where I can just move through because you guys already know. So if you could all answer this first question, and then I'll proceed the slide. And at the end, I'll leave up the slide as I move to my deck, where you can post questions so that we can come back to them, and you can just throw things in there anytime through the chat. So you'll see where we end. So I'm seeing that some people are getting on here. I don't know how many people are actually on the call. Let me see. Okay. So maybe 20 or so. Okay. Okay. So I see there's still some unanswered people, so I'm going to give it a second, but this is just a good way to help us see like what the attitude in the room is, right? People are feeling a little bit in the middle, which I think is very reasonable. I usually am concerned when I do this poll and it's on either end of the optimistic, because if you're overly optimistic, maybe diluted. If you're totally pessimistic and cynical, then you might actually miss some real opportunity. And that's good. We're at a place of most people feeling somewhat confident, but there's still people who seems like total newbies to it, which is totally fine. Okay, so generally a pretty moderate audience, with the most leaning towards that people should adopt AI solutions soon, which is interesting. We'll see where we'll come back around to that. Now that we got people on the poll, let's go to the next slide. And it's okay if you don't even know about some of these things. But I'm guessing through the news, many of you have heard at least some of this. So if you are concerned, or, especially since nobody put a 5 of I'm just so optimistic about AI, what this poll asks you to do is kind of rank which of these concerns is actually what's on your mind when maybe have a pessimistic or, cautious mindset about what might happen or why you might adopt AI? Okay. See if we can get a few more. We only got 2 people who finished. This one takes a little bit of thought, so I get it. Good. Now we're starting to get more of the audience in. Yes, and we see one of the big concerns, which makes sense, is the energy demand. And I think that is a kind of overarching wraparound concern that we should all have. And there needs to be a really serious conversation about that. And I would be lying if I said I thought that the political and higher level conversation is correctly tuned. I don't think it is to like what this really could mean. But to maybe be a little bit fair to some politicians, there's always also a lot of uncertainty about what's really going to scale. And honestly, that's an area where we can probably more think of ourselves at the personal level of how do we advocate for, strong leadership around general responsible energy policy, both at the climate change and level, but also at the level of like pricing and how we're gonna and energy production. And so I think there's been one thing I've heard that's clear that if the energy demand is going to scale the way that there's predictions, if AI gets adopted the way it's being projected, really everyone needs to probably rally around nuclear energy as a real serious option. It's the cleanest energy by far for the most amount of demand that it can handle. And anything else at the scales we're talking about is going to either destroy our planet or destroy our wallets, one or the other, and is just the real reality. So I really think that's my quick, without doing a bunch of citations, just seeing that that's a top concern, is people should really be looking at the analysis around nuclear and considering that, but while at the same time looking at what happens if this demand doesn't happen, I think is another kind of piece of this. Is like, what if AI isn't adopted at the level, or what if it changes the energy demands, and then we, prepare all these new natural gas plants and all this kind of stuff. There's some concerns there, but I'll leave that for you guys to interpret. But hallucination and perpetuating lies, misinformation, and bias are definitely 2 really big concerns. We'll talk a little bit about those today and how to tame those. But the hallucination aspect, you're going to understand more by the end of today so that you can hopefully at least know what to expect. But I want to be really honest that the hallucination aspect, given the nature of the technology today, we will not solve it. It's not a thing that can be solved. You'll understand once you talk about the nature of the technology, which is bad and good news. Bad because the more we just totally blindly rely on it, the more we might perpetuate misinformation. But the good news is it kind of means that the critical thinking of humans is absolutely necessary to the success of AI tools, if used appropriately. So we'll kind of look at that. I personally think the less social and more distrusting is something I'm very concerned about, more at the level of how we all interact, our expectations about what we think we know, what we learned from AI, our tolerance with other people, our tolerance with difference, and all this kind of stuff. And so, okay, good. Last quick one. This is just a single. How often do you use AI tools today, people in the room? Okay. Okay. So we're skewed towards adoption, but not uniformly. People have generally started to adopt. Okay. That's good. That's actually good. So then people are going to have more context. All right. So I'm going to keep moving to keep us on time. But this was helpful and it gives me a sense of what the people in the room are thinking about. I'm going to leave this up in terms of put what you want when you want on here, because I'll treat it as a kind of like something to return to see if there was unanswered or response. And we can maybe actually ask people to like clarify things. So I'm going to leave this up. You can stay on this page, even though it's going to disappear from our screen, and you can throw things on here as we go, of like things maybe that are gaps or something you wish you to learn. There's probably limits to a 45-minute remaining session, but we'll do our best. So throw things in there as you can. We'll come back to it at the end. So the first thing is we just have to address this as an elephant in the room that there is just a lot of claims being made about AI, which I think are very confusing for people who are just watching the news and are not working in the field of AI in some capacity, right? You have CEOs basically saying, oh, half of white collar jobs are going to be gone. We have people saying there's going to be just an abundance of new free time, which I find to be a little bit laughable, but and there's just predictions going on all the time about which jobs is are AI going to take, what's automation look like. We're hearing about companies cutting staff already and layoffs. Um, and so, I do want to acknowledge that there's no doubt it's already changing a lot of things about how people work. I mean, even our survey showed that, right? And as a professor, I can say it's also changing how people receive education and how people are training themselves, and for good and bad. Maybe my perception right now is still a little more on the bad side on the education side, and maybe a little bit on the good side on the work side is happening, but that's just a very hot take. I also just want to acknowledge something about the hype is whether the AI capabilities are there or not. Young people are using AI to socialize. That's not really going to be the center of our talk, but I really think people need to wrap their heads around that because that is a whole blind area that people aren't even honestly very attuned to. And here I do all these debates and discussions with students, and the number of young people already using agents, AI agents, as like social companions to talk with things that they feel no adult, no mentor really wants to address, nobody wants to talk about in the classroom. They don't know how to talk to their friends. They're dealing with their social anxieties, their sense of loneliness, their mental health with AI. And so Character AI is probably the most popular platform. If you don't know about it, go get familiar because millions, you'll be blown away when you go on Character AI and find out some of the character bots on there have tens of millions of users, active users. And they're mostly young people. I have at Community Forge, we have a team that goes out into schools, and already kids as young as like third and fourth grade, when we ask them, what are you doing this weekend? They're like, oh, I'm going to hang out with my friend. Who's your friend? Oh, it's Sonic, the AI. And they're going to just sit around and talk to a fake friend AI, Sonic, the Hedgehog. Kids are just saying this to us openly. This is what they're going to do over the weekend. So I just want people to be like, okay, there's a lot of stuff about work. Is it hype? I would argue a lot of it is, but there's also a lot of truth that's going to change things. But I think the promise is really high. But I think the blind spot about what really might be in the 10-year trail of all this, the change, is going to be some work, but more about the social characteristics of young people. So that's just a little prediction about where I think the hype is missing. So the reality check, though, on the hype, right, is okay, it's all really cool. It's great. I can just talk to an AI and it can just start generating things, telling me about documents, save me time, you know, quality assessment aside. MIT put out a kind of burning report this summer that went all through the tech industry because they studied companies adopting AI at scale, and 95% of the AI pilots that were happening corporate wide, they say are failing. There's back and forth about that article, but I think the article, if you take a look at it, it's all free. You can go and look up MIT report failing AI. You'll find it very quickly. It kind of points to the things you would guess, which is that people don't really know how to use it properly. They're mostly using it to kind of offload and kind of be lazy. And then the actual AI isn't as good as they wanted it to be. And then it's in now a pipeline where we need that work to go to someone and it needs to be reviewed and have a high quality. And it's just not there, just not at the quality. So there's these like failure points in the systems. And I think MIT is also right that the assessment isn't that the AI doesn't have capabilities. It's that people misunderstand the capabilities, and then we're not structuring our teams and our workflows around the true capabilities, but instead the mythical capabilities. And I also want to point out that like while there's so much hype and everyone's saying adopt, and this is going to change the workforce, I just want to like kind of make sure we're all aware this is a historical trend. I want to point out a article from the New York Times, The Electronic Brain Teaches Itself, which was about the first neural network, the perceptron, which they taught to see things basically in the 1950s at Cornell Labs. And in 1958, this New York Times article says within a decade, We will have walking and talking robots. Work is going to change fundamentally. People are going to be out of jobs. It makes all the same predictions as today. And I want to then bring up like Marvin Minsky, an AI academic expert and who's been involved in many consulting of tech startups. He's been again and again with others like Ray Kurzweil and Elon Musk continually saying that the AI revolution is in the next 10 years, it's around the corner, and creating hype bubbles of investment and then collapses. And this cycle's been going on and on. So I just want to point out, while it all feels like, well, I'm using ChatGPT and or Claude or whatever, and it's wow, this feels different. And I think we're going to get to it. There are differences. I also just want to be clear that I think that maybe it's just that the general public finally has its hands a little more on something because people for 70 years who get their hands on new AI start to go, oh my gosh, this is going to change everything. And then does it? Unclear, right? I think things have changed. I think in some ways you could say that people have been right. Things have changed with machine learning and data processing. So we can argue for some of these claims, but not at the scale that they hyped, right? So I think that's just let's all have cautious eyes, right? Uh, Work's going to change for many reasons, and that's the other thing I just want to state as a caveat: work is going to change, and AI is going to be part of it. But some of it has to do with other dynamics. I highly recommend actually the McKinsey report that recently came out about the changing workplace, where they talk about AI, but they actually talk about other things like pressures of what kind of jobs people in America are willing to take, at changes in the labor market and demands, changes around shortages and trades. There's going to be a lot of things that change work right now because the economy might have a general correction that's going on that's AI related, but not fully. But I also think be cautious about the capabilities and make sure you're, putting on a little bit of protection to yourself to like jump into that. This is the revolution that'll change everything versus any other or the next hype fight cycle or whatever. Um, so now, okay, I'm addressing where we are culturally, but let's now ask where we are technically. Like, what if now putting on my computer science hat, not my cultural theorist hat, where is the technology now, which is actually quite exciting. So let's start with just making sure we have some terms that are thrown around and that we're all able to use them and share them. The first big one is foundation model. This is a critical term, probably not even used enough, honestly, in favor of just AI or LLM, as we're going to get to in a second. A foundation model is kind of a core taught trained model. When we say model, we mean statistical model, right? That's been built off of a corpus of data. The beautiful thing about our current is we're going to learn about our current paradigm of AI is this idea that we can build foundation models that are they can extract data from many, many types of multimodal sources, meaning visual data, audio data, textbooks, right? You can put a bunch of sources together and then embed all of the information from those sources and then a way where we can generate out of that model, right? So a foundation model is often at the center, and then you create submodels that are task-based. So I'm showing here a workflow of using foundation models in a healthcare setting where people are like, okay, we have all this healthcare data, it's multimodal. We're going to build a foundation model that embeds the data from all of that. So in some ways, we have a way to represent that data in kind of one shared transformation of it all into like one big statistical thing. Okay, but then to actually make that useful, we'll have different ways that foundation model turns into a chatbot. It turns into a way to summarize medical charts, to analyze images, right? And those are all different models, right? That are all curated and task dependent, but they build on and draw from the foundation model. So that's really important because if a lot of times people are like, oh my gosh, this thing's so good at, well, it's like they have a big body of data. They use this way to embed that data of building a foundation model. And then there's actually a stack of other models. And this is also important to like our work with the Open Forum for AI is we want people to understand that this model stacking is really what's happening. Like Chat GPT isn't just one model. It's a stack of models, that are being used to make certain tasks better and better, to make the agent interaction better and better. And once we understand that, we start to realize there's a freedom in the marketplace that's going to hopefully emerge over time as people get more literate, where I can swap out parts of models. I can choose which foundation model I want to use, which has the right data for me, and which things do I want to like slap on top of that. So that's just some stuff to think about and understand. Large language models are this very popular type of model because it's the way to basically build a foundation model that is good at talking. Because LLMs mean the core of my foundation model here, right, is text. And then my training paradigm is to be able to generate text, as we're going to talk about. Where training here means that repetitive process, right? We're using data to sort of like align how the model actually responds and trying to get it to do better and better at something. So that at something is the hard part, or the interesting part. And we'll talk a little bit about there's like a kind of revolution in that right now, which, right, why today's models are different, these foundation models, right, is because machine learning that was going on in the 2000s, very, very feature centric, task centric. Like I have a set of images, I'm trying to extract what we call features or the important pieces of that image. I have a corpus of text, I'm trying to extract what are the words or the elements of this that are even important. And then I'm going to take those features and I'm going to try to like get it to associate them to a particular task. Identify a flower in this image, right, by species. Identify the key elements of this piece of text, right, so that I can find citations or something like that. But the thing is, those models were very brittle, meaning if you once you built it, that feature extraction, everything, what you fed it needed to be the exact same every time. Those type of models needed really, really particular like 48 by 48 or 480 by 480 pixel image or something, and you send it something that wasn't that, that feature extraction broke down, blah, blah, blah. Now you have deep learning moves in the 2010s, important precursor to these foundation models. We're now, okay, we actually don't need to extract features anymore. We don't need to worry about what's in the data so much. We need to worry more about the task. And these new fangled things called neural networks, they were around for a long time, but we got really good at them because of compute power and some methods. And we started to be like, I don't have to worry about features. I just got to worry about what I want the task to sort of like result in. So now I don't have to figure out how do I pull out the important parts of text or how do I find features in an image. I can just give it an image, and a neural network with enough training of knowing the answer just starts to somehow encode the way to find that answer, right? So that was actually really key to start not having to extract features. Because then the next phase where we're at today is these foundation models, where now, okay, I don't actually need to know the task. I don't need to know the features or the task anymore. I actually tune the model to be inherently what we call generative, where now whatever you ask it, it starts to just predict. And sometimes the predictions are language. We have in medical industry, predictions can be protein chains. Predictions can be text, as you see, or sorry, images, as you see with like the models that create images. And I'm sure you've seen some of those on the news, if not played around yourself, generating images, right? So now it's like the model can start predicting and generating whatever you want from beddings, and it actually now can flexibly take in whatever task you want to ask it. That is the big change here. And we call that zero shot performance is the fancy way to talk about that. Today's AI systems, the big breakthrough has been that this generative idea of like just generate what should come next given what you give me. That allows us to handle unknown tasks, brand new tasks. Zero shot means that's my first time even trying this, right? That's basically what it means. The model, the first time it's ever been asked, something it's never been asked, it actually can predict a pretty reasonable response. And that's very different than all the old paradigms. So I just want to kind of like flag that as that has what made ChatGPT, Claude, this moment we're in is the fact that these things aren't brittle anymore. They can take you throw whatever at it and it starts giving you pretty reasonable predictions and responses. Um, but it doesn't change the fact that it is still, just to go back, it's in this paradigm of predicting, embedding data and predicting, right? Um, and then now we're starting to talk about this idea of AI agents. Well, what do we mean by agents, right? Well, hopefully I've given you now a bit of background to sort of understand that there's these foundation model things. Sometimes they're trained particularly on language to like express language or other things, right? That's an LLM. Well, an agent is really what happens when you take a foundation model and then you add on and create an environment where the way the foundation model responds is now actually structured such that it knows maybe things about the environment and the expectations of the user, very specifically. That could be everything from the software it's embedded in to the documents that it's supposed to be able to reference to what is the actual specific tasks and goals. Because we said it could, right? It can work on any task, but it's better if it knows what task, right? It's better if that's in context. Um, right? So an agent is really just this matter of putting software and tools and documents and data and task specifications into the environment so that as the model starts predicting its responses, those responses are more and more specified and tuned to what you're really trying to do. Because the core of the foundation model, you just make a foundation model, slap an LLM on it so that it's like language oriented and it starts chatting. And that's great. It can say a lot of really interesting things. But is it actually good at giving expert legal advice? Is it actually good at giving medical advice? Chances are it's going to be not that good, actually. And it's going to be very dependent on how you speak to it. Because that's one of the key insights that we're about to get to is that agents help you make foundation models more useful. So we're going to come this direction, right? But we need to now like maybe understand a little bit about the inherent. I kind of hand waved at a lot of training and oh, there's ways which foundation models, then slap on other models. Okay, well, what's going on? What are these core mechanisms? And while there's probably too much to teach in a single lecture or even a single class, we can at least gain that basic intuition that the key to these new chat models that we're all interacting with language, is this idea of predict the next token, right? As we were saying, machine learning for decades has been about give me a piece of data, do things with it that eventually lead to a prediction, a recommendation, right? Some kind of next output, right? And what has made this zero shot new foundation model kind of paradigm so good is when your foundation model is an LLM, meaning it was trained on a ton of text data and language, then you can actually get really good at just predicting what the next word should be given a set of words given to it. So when I ask a question, I think one key thing to realize is the model's not like inherently understanding the question in some deep way. It's actually tuning to be like, what is the next word? What's the next word after that? What's the next word after that? And it just so happens that actually that prediction chain, we've gotten really, really good at that so that it sounds really human. It sounds really reasonable. It also pulls the parts of the data that are probably the most relevant from the sort of background model. But you can play around. We'll post these slides. I click here. Uh, Google has a very nice interactive example for this of you can interact with one of their early LLMs that they've made open called BERT, which is a precursor to Gemini, which is their current foundation model. But BERT was what they used to play with, and now they've made it open, and you can play around with it and see the inherent mechanism here, which is you give it a set of words and it starts predicting what the next word could be. So you can see here in this example, to be or not to be, comma, that is what's the foundation model try to say next, right? It predicts that I should say the word question, right? Because this is the famous Shakespearean quote. But you can also play around and just swap out one word and watch how one word changing can totally change this prediction chain. And that gets to something that's has to do with hallucinations, that has to do with misinformation, is that the nature of these models are that individual word differences, and definitely when you have larger vocabulary differences between people, lead to pretty volatile changes in output, right? So here what I show is, two people kind of asking the same question, but with more or less sophisticated language, and the model diverges, it sort of starts predicting in a similar way at the front because it realizes it's starting to predict giving advice about a real estate situation with a landlord. But then how that diverges changes to like, is it going to describe legal like protections, or is it going to tell you to like start calling people or do some advocacy work, right? So and that's what you see in this particular case. But I recommend you just try this for yourself. Go into your model of choice, whatever you use, and try asking a question 3 or 4 different ways. Maybe use more jargon, less jargon, and start to see what some of the differences and dynamics are of how it responds. And you'll probably see some similarities because probably the prediction chain has some things that are more likely, but it's probably going to diverge, especially if you start asking two or three more questions. Then the divergence starts to really go. Um, but maybe I just want to make sure I didn't undersell today's capabilities because you might be asking, well, man, if one word can really take this thing all kinds of directions, why does it feel like it does understand what I'm asking? And that gets to like the really big innovation that kind of like made foundation models useful and LLMs useful. So they weren't just like blurting kind of nonsense and going on and on about things, which there's plenty of. If you look at a lot of instances of 2021 ChatGPT and 2022, it was saying a lot of nonsense. But now we've gotten really good at this attention mechanism. Attention's a key word. I'm highlighting it there. It is jargon. You can look into it. That's a kind of technical term that has to do with how we create this thing called a context window. And a context window basically says, hey, when you respond to me, here's what I want you to actually like really make sure is added before you predict anything. So I might have said a question, but a context window can say, hey, when I'm responding to that question, I'm going to consider all this other information to orient my prediction. So it's not just your question in a vacuum, it's your question plus maybe tons of things, such as your prior conversation, like the last five questions, such as maybe a document or a set of documents. We're going to get into some of this and how attention in context windows can be a helper to you. But needing to understand that there is a context window because it's quite the affordance. It's amazing, actually. The more you can put in the context window, those predictions can get more and more precise. But it also helps you understand how, if it starts predicting weird things, if it starts to hallucinate, if it starts making up citations or saying something, that means something about its context is starting to diverge and push it towards a prediction chain of words that don't make sense. And I even think Vince was actually saying this to me recently about advising people. Something you start to realize is if it starts to say BS to you, you probably want to reset your context window, meaning start a new chat, start fresh, because it's pretty hard to get out of that prediction chain once it starts to go haywire. So bank that if that's something you're thinking about as hallucinations. And I definitely think in the Q&A, and I would defer to Vince, I think he's probably seen the most examples of how you bring these things back to sanity. All right, so let's recap my little mini technical talk, the 5-minute technical talk, right? Fundamental technology is predict the next word. That's the fundamental technology. Attention and context allows that fundamental next token thing to be really precise, feel really precise, almost like it understands you, because it actually does have in its sort of bias of how it's going to predict everything you want it to know, maybe sometimes, especially if it has a good, rich context window, documents and prompts and things. We're going to get to all that. So now, if we understand this basic predict the next token with the context window, we can actually now start talking about how do you guys use it? How do you exploit this technology to do good things, right? Because I hope that's probably what you all want to get to. You're like, thanks, Mike. I didn't ask for a computer science lecture. I want to just know how to use things, right? So hopefully I've given you now enough to use things. Because the first technique that we can talk about where there's opportunities is learning about prompting. Um, where prompting is basically just giving very specific instructions, right? Um, to the AI, which kind of turns it into an agent, quote unquote, that jargon, right? Now it's not just your generic foundation model anymore. You've now, once you give it a prompt, you've now put stuff in the context window that sets a sort of pathway for how it's going to interact with you. So, right. So a prompt is just a way to leverage. And there's a bunch of ways we can talk about prompts, but prompts are really start with as simple as before you ask your question, telling the agent, telling the model you're working with some specifics about how you want to be talked to, right? Um, and so this is like what I would call the simplest AI agent. It's just something that has a prompt, right? So we call these when the prompt is behind the scenes, we'll call that a system prompt, meaning like for my students, I have them interact with AI agents, and there's a system prompt, meaning the student doesn't see it, but before they interact with the AI bot, right, there actually is behind the scenes, it's the AI bot's already being fed context it's coming with your question or your query or conversation, right? But prompts can also be explicit. They don't have to be system prompts behind the scenes. They can be you putting them into your question, right? To get a better answer. So the opportunity here is that, and this is where it starts leveraging your expertise, your knowledge of the task. You don't need some software guru. You don't need me, right? Because if you understand what you're really doing and you're thinking critical, then don't think of your interaction with the AI agent like I'm talking to my buddy or I'm, like I know that's the temptation and they frame it like it's like you're talking to someone. It's this like real nice interaction, whatever. It's polite, they like to be complimentary, the bots, whatever. Um, but in reality, think of it like you're instructing a robot, right? Really. And so the more you tell it about exactly what you want to do, give detailed instructions. You should see the systems prompts I do for my students. They're like pages of detailed instructions. This is your persona. This is how you answer. This is the goals. These are the learning objectives of this interaction. I mean, pages sometimes to get it exactly where I want. And then you kind of rinse and repeat. You give it those prompts, then you have an interaction, see if it does what you want with those prompts in context. And if it doesn't, you go back, you start fresh and you tweak your prompts. And you start realizing, oh, if I tell it this, if I explain things this way, it's really, really good. And these are things like Vince taught me and learned things that I got to, steal from him quickly, which is like a prompt is way better if it says what to do instead of don't do. Like saying don't do this, don't do that tends to fail. As opposed to saying do this is what I want, act this way it's way better at modeling that. Um, so prompts often are going to be instructions, they're often going to be personas. Hey, you're a patient who just went through a traumatic injury. How might you see? What? You could tell it, this is your mindset. These are your guiding principles and ethics or whatever, or these are your guiding principles and evaluation keys, right? Or what role? Hey, you're on the legal team. Hey, you're a marketing person, right? You can describe how you want it to respond with instructions for what the task is, and even provide evaluation rubrics like give me a response and evaluate it against this rubric or this, right? So you can start to see how now designing an agent, which sounds real fancy, is actually just you starts with like the most basic is you just telling really specifically, this is what I want. This is what I'm trying to do with you. Now I'm going to give you my first question. Now I'm going to actually start interacting with you. But first, I'm gonna tell you exactly what I want. It's like training an employee, right? Um, so that's a key, and that can help you a long way just getting really good with all the prompting and being really explicit and having a good what I'll call systems thinking mindset about it, where it's like you're rinsing and repeating, you're reiterating, did this prompt do what I want? Did it evaluate how I want? Okay, let me change that prompt a little bit. Let me see if I can figure out the things that are making the prediction chain go off. How do I align it? So that's kind of how your mindset be. Instead of, did it understand me? Get out of the magical thinking. Think of it as, did the predictions go the direction I want them? Did they not? Okay, I'm going to try a different word, see if I can nudge those predictions a different direction. That's a key intuition. And that's what prompting is your first tool of defense against. Like, I can move the prediction chains. Okay. Second major technique is called RAG. RAG is a retrieval augmented generation. It's an acronym. And basically, it's a way to put data, background data, into your context such that it biases your outputs so that when it talks to you, whenever the model starts to actually generate prediction of text, it's almost like it has already the sources in mind you want it to talk like and draw from. Vince has described this in the past, I thought a useful way. It's like giving an open book test. It's like, hey, students, here's your 5 questions. All the answers are in this textbook. You can use the textbook for the duration of the exam, right? Very similar. There's a lot of other very technical things that I can get into, embeddings and vector biasing and blah, blah, which is really the nature of what's going on there. Is that you're basically the foundation model takes your text, makes an inference, does that fancy computer thing, starts to want to talk to you. And then, but before it turns its math into words, its numbers into words, it gets biased by the index of your document. That's the more technical thing, but you can forget all that if that didn't resonate with you and just go, it's like an open book text. I can say, before you start talking to me, check these sources. That's the more kind of like layperson's way of thinking about it that's pretty valid. Um, so how can we use and exploit this other feature of context windows and the fact that I can actually direct the prediction chain? We can make RAG bots, right? Where RAG bots are basically like little agents where okay, when you talk to me, I want you to specifically look at these scholarly articles. I want you to specifically look at these 30 past grants I wrote. I want you to specifically look at this textbook, right? And you can upload documents and they become embedded as an index for how now your model talks to you, right? There's some really nice things about this too, because RAG can be done. We'll get into infrastructure at the end of this. It can be done privately, which is a really nice thing. So you could use a heavy model like a Chat GPT, and then after it does the heavy lifting, you can have your own RAG agent that then translates using private documents. So a lot of companies and places that are worried about privacy, that's how they're starting to use this is like, okay, I don't want to build a foundation model, but I also don't want to give all my data to ChatGPT, right? So this is kind of like a compromise. Although I will also flag that ChatGPT and Anthropic and these places that are offering foundation models, they tend to have features in there if you have a pro account where you can upload documents and put things into RAG. And that's what's happening if you ever see like I use Claude sometimes and it has a little plus sign and I can upload a document into my chat context. And it's basically just making my chat instance into a quote unquote RAG bot for me. Um, and there's more and less private ways to do that if you want, right? And so examples of what you can do is take a bunch of articles that you've either read or you didn't read all of them, but you know they're important, put them into context, upload them, turn your agent into a RAG bot, and then start asking questions about the articles. Get examples, get references, ask them for pulling quotes, right? You can put a bunch of proposals into there and then interrogate and analyze, right? You can put a bunch of case files in there and study and assess trends, right? You can put company information in there so that employees can more easily understand how company policy or how company assets fit. One of my friends who works at a large pharmaceutical company that does experimental trials and clinical trials, they've built a giant RAG bot that is all of their clinical trials. That way I don't have to contact every research department to find out about past trials, what went right or wrong. I can actually say, this is a trial I'm about to run. How does this fit in with what we've done in the past? And it has in context all the past trials, just as an example of how people are using RAG in industry. Um, so now to just like break this down, the diagram at the bottom starts to help us see the complexity. So I have what I can do always, which is I can give a system prompt. I can prompt and say, this is what you need to do, agent, before my query. But the other thing now I can do is, okay, I have my prompt and I have my query. But then when you go to predict what to say, you can say, hey, reference my documents, that little green barrel, which is, us computer scientists love to make barrels to save data. So you can also predict using my documents before you actually make the response, the final response of like the words you're going to say to me. So RagBots is another tool that you can get familiar with. The last tool, and there are more tools, but the last one I'm going to cover today is workflows and chaining, right? It can be useful because agents can be thought of as almost like little functional people or like little functional experts that know about just their domain. And as we've been saying about this prediction chain and how it goes volatile and hallucinates, it's actually better to just try to hone an agent to do one thing good than it is to try to get it to do many, many things good. That's going to be a lot harder. It's going to be a lot, honestly, less likely. So what can become really useful is, okay, this agent got really good at answering medical questions. This agent's really good at speaking in empathetic language. This agent's really good at pulling citations from articles, whatever, right? You can tune different agents and then you can chain them to make a workflow, right? This is basically what automation 101. But the nice thing is you can also, agents can be in parallel and sequence. What I mean there is, as you see on the right? So I can say, hey, send this query to 3 different agents, get all their responses, then come back to one agent that's actually going to summarize all three, right? Or I can just have it be a chain of transcribe this interview, pull quotes, summarize trends. And I just have it's three agents in sequence. So that's what I mean by sequence versus parallel. I can send it to multiple agents at once, and that can leverage different ways and of kind of using the work of the AI. But a lot of times you need to make sure each agent is actually doing what it wants, or else because one bad agent, one hallucination in the system also can corrupt the entire thing. So that's just the cautionary tale here, which is why it's best to go agent by agent and have every agent be good at one thing that you feel really good about how it's behaving. And then you can chain it with better results. I also want to flag, I think this is why you see the 95%, the MIT report, right? 95% of these things are failing because two sides of that. One, one of the agents is messing up and nobody really knows why. Nobody evaluated it critically enough. And now I built this automation workflow, but every time it ends up giving bad information to the customer, or it ends up, not having high quality enough case file for actual use, or whatever it is, right? Probably what happened was in the mix, somebody just slapped together an agent that wasn't that good, said this is good enough. They didn't know how to test it, they didn't know how to evaluate it, they didn't think critically about it. The second, I think, option is why these things are failing is because the people who are actually the critical thinking people defining the task that understand the task, they're not being involved enough. We're too seduced by the idea of cheaper and efficient tasks, and we're not getting people to use their critical brains to say, what's the task process? How does it really work? How do you finish it? And you just go, you get into the allure of the agents. Wow, it did five things so good. This was so great. Yeah, automate it. Next thing you know, 150 people, 10,000 people go through that automation chain. Turns out 10% of the time it just starts babbling nonsense, right? And so I think that's why humans are important and agent refinement really important, right? Um, because immediately, if you can take this multi-agent reasoning thing, it allows you to make workflows that have people in them, right? Workflows don't have to be pure automation. They can be a mixture of agents and people, right? That's actually, I think, kind of our recommendation of how I work, how my students work. I think the ones who are using it right, not just using my agents to cheat or whatever, right? But I think the best is, okay, I want some outside perspective. I want data from scholarly sources to help me think through this. I want something that handles boilerplate, puts this in the template I need it to be in, or whatever, right? So that I can focus on the most important things, like the creative thinking, synthesizing the expert knowledge, knowing what the actual people involved want, right? And so then you can have a whole flow where sometimes the agents are doing things and they're giving you information, then you're evaluating that information, then you're sending it back into the pipeline for the next thing. Um, and I actually would say that this human and agent looping, as opposed to pure automation, this is the real future to me. This is where augmentation, as opposed to replacement, starts to be the sort of way of thinking I'm very concerned about the pure automation mindset. I think that the human in the loop mindset is the key, and these workflows, which you can already do pretty easily. You don't even need that much fancy automation. You can just, I'm going to ask this chat GPT this with this prompt. It's going to give me information. I'm going to save that in a document. Then I'm going to pull up chat GPT new conversation, reprompt it. I don't even need any fancy tooling. I could start having workflows that I just do that get me good results very manually. And of course, there are automation frameworks as well too, but just something you can think about. You don't need much fancy stuff to start thinking in a workflow. Okay. So the key insight I want you to take away from what I just taught you is these techniques are very accessible. You can build literacy, you can build acumen really quickly with your skill set because we're working in human language, right? We're not working with code or some kind of like fancy logical abstraction or even math or anything, right? We're just talking. It's like talking and training people, right? And then thinking about org charts and thinking about functions of like work, right? So if you understand your task, if you're a subject matter expert, you actually really don't need engineers to start using AI in a sophisticated way. I hope that's the key insight. I hope I just walked away because the things that I just told you, for-profit companies are jumping in all the time and saying, we know you don't know what these things are, so we'll do it for you with a upfront fee, and then you'll pay a subscription to access our agents and blah, blah, blah. And I'm not going to say that all of them are scams. There are ones that are adding really unique value. They're doing something, adding software layers that are really hard maybe for a person to build. But man, have I seen a lot that are the other way. All they did was put your text and your chat into a fancy new looking chat that makes you feel like you got something custom. And really in the back end, you got this. You got ChatGPT with lipstick, is that what I always call it. That they're just sending your stuff to ChatGPT. You could have been doing that anyways. And they're just putting in system prompts or uploading things to RAG that you gave them and saying, all right, now pay us. And then you go, hey, this thing's not actually doing what I want. Okay, cool. We can fix that. Pay us. This stuff's happening a lot. Meanwhile, you know better how to fix it. You could iterate faster than them because you actually know what you're trying to do. Um, and it is a true reality that I've run into dozens of nonprofits and for-profits that are already locked in on contracts. And then they end up to coming to someone like me because I give a talk and they're like, am I right or wrong that this thing's not really that good? And then I play with it. I'm like, you're right. It is not that good. And they're now locked in. They're paying for 12 months, thousands of dollars a month, and they have to go back now to some expert, quote unquote, in between. So that's just not to be damning of everyone really, because there are actually, I think, people bringing in unique perspective out there. But you should really think about what are you getting? Because if all you're getting is an agent that's just got some like where you had to describe the task anyways, and you had to give it the company documents anyways, I would challenge what you're really getting. If they're not bringing software or expertise to the table that's unique into the subject matter expertise that you need, like it's giving you a way to operate that is very specific to your subject, you might want to reconsider. Okay. I think I've made my points and I'm going to move towards the end because I want to hear questions and we are already almost at the end. And so we'll use our extra few 10 minutes maybe to see what kind of questions. But I think we're hearing here the real opportunity is you all, the service providers, getting empowered, knowing how to design your own agents, knowing how to use automation. This is how we become resilient also as a workforce, right? The automation crisis is really only a crisis if everybody doesn't know how to do things. So then, okay, well, now I'm choosing between using AI or using employee. AI is cheaper. I'm going to use employee. But if it's like I'm actually getting an employee who knows how to use AI and is super strong, now I'm actually like, well, this is way better, right? Because otherwise, when my AI fails, I might be, as the Salesforce CEO already got caught saying, he's regretting letting go of 4,000 employees last year, thinking automations were going to help because people using Salesforce aren't super happy with all the automations. So our goal is to sort of set up this empowerment mindset about it all. We think one of the things that I want to leave you with is that the big opportunity is going to be around shared infrastructure, right? Because otherwise, that's the difference between you and the startup that's trying to sell you. Is the startup has some infrastructure, they have a back end for uploading your data, right? They have a little bit of software to help you customize that agent, whereas you're just using ChatGPT, which might just have a little bit require more steps for you to make really sophisticated agents. The flip side is if nonprofits, government entities, if we get together and create shared infrastructure that can be private, that allows us to just sandbox and play around in a kind of common environment without paying a service provider to do it for us, to me, that's where the big opportunity is for funders, for collaboration, etc. So, oh, I went the wrong way. I'll leave it at that. I'll leave this in the slide. Our team is doing hands-on trainings where you build agents, where you do all this stuff and then evaluate it and everything. We're doing it through my nonprofit Community Forge. There's a QR code if you want to get on the wait list. If you're someone who's like, this all sounds great, I want to actually start building. We can do that with you. You can get on our wait list for these workshops. So thanks. We're going to stick around for a few minutes for Q&A. I appreciate your time, and I'll switch the screen over to see what learnings and questions came up in the other chain. But we can open up, Joan, to anybody who wants to talk.
Thanks so much, Mike, for the presentation. You really gave us a lot to think about and to move forward to understand the basics of AI and how it's impacting our work already and what we can do to move forward in it. So I see there are some questions there, and I don't know if Vince or Say wants to comment on them as well.
Yeah, if somebody just wants to pick one, I'm sorry, excuse
What's
me.
the best free tool? That's a good one to start with.
Okay, so it's a little bit of a loaded question because there's a lot of good best free tools. So what I would say is that you want to explore the landscape of what you're trying to do, right? So ChatGPT has so all of the major companies give you some free access today. And I think you should go ahead and habitually test them to see if you like their interaction design, how they work for you, things like that. They all give a certain amount of free calls every day for their premium services. So that goes for Gemini, which is Google, Claude, which is from Anthropic, and obviously ChatGPT, which is OpenAI. So those are the big three models, right? There's many other websites like Poe and things like that that you can get access as well. I know what a lot of students at CMU do is they just use all of the free versions a little bit every day, and then that's actually quite a big chunk of premium access, right? But then you can see like test out your workflows, test out your lower order tasks, things like that. And what I'd recommend the most about them is you should just explain what you're trying to achieve in your day-to-day, things that you have friction on, and see which one of these models give you the kind of best advice and interaction, right? Because a lot of it is about sampling things like that. So best free tool, I think that's a tough one because are you doing marketing? Are you doing data analysis? But the big three is a good place to start because they're all kind of designed to be a multi-tool, right? So then you can kind of see some of the capabilities there where you might want to head. And then you can think about more custom or focused environments like, do I want to use a marketing tool? Do I want to use Canva and things like that?
Yeah, and I'll
Yeah,
just
I'll
add,
say, oh, good. Please say.
sorry, I'll just add that, to reinforce the points both Mike and Vince made, hopefully you have a real sense now that these things basically make guesses, right? So if anyone is showing up to tell you, hey, I have the answer for you, or I have a tool that will give you the answer, you should be wary, right? Because these things are making guesses, and there's no way for this person who's telling you that they have the answer to know how it's making those guesses, right? So the idea of testing these different tools, and Vince gave some very good examples, seeing where they're better than the other tool is really key, right? I think the hope about 2.5 years ago when ChatGPT got released to the world was that they were going to produce this general purpose tool that would answer every question you might have, right? And it just simply isn't going to happen. And eventually people began to realize, well, life isn't just about questions and answers. It's also about accomplishing tasks, right? And I mentioned, before this call started, I have a plumber that's about to show up apparently. AI isn't going to help you with your plumbing right now. Right? So there's a whole set of things AI cannot do for you, but even tasks that don't require physical labor, different AI systems are going to be better at some tasks. Different agents, as Mike said, are going to be better at some tasks. It becomes much more complicated when you try to do all these things together. So it's just really important to be able to test these things on your own, not worry that, what if I type something, I get a wrong answer. You may, so what? It's just a guess. Just keep working with it. Keep using the prompts to keep, I love the way Vince once described this to me is these things have personalities, right? Each of these models actually have a personality. And the prompt is kind of a window into that personality. And sorry, it's on my mind, to the example that Mike talked about earlier. I was asking, these three models about the toilet problem that I'm having, right? And it was giving me answers. I came back hours later and asked a totally different question, and it kept going with the toilet, right? And I actually literally said, forget the damn toilet. I want something else now. So really, it's just really important for you to try them and ask questions of people who seem very certain about selling you a solution.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for those answers. I was just wondering too, if we can touch on how to maybe gather a virtual assistant. How can we impact that? Can that be easily handled or?
I think it depends on what you want again from the virtual assistant. Like I probably would not use, for instance, a virtual assistant to just actually like automate it, write emails or do something like this. Like that's sounds risky to me. I wouldn't do it. What I would do is like having an assistant or agent that can do a couple things. One, prioritize my task list, right? You can put your task list easily into context. You can have a task list, you can update it each time, or if you have a pro account, something you can just be on there, connected to say Google Drive or some other place where you have it stored in the cloud. Great. So you can have like, hey, here's the things I'm working on right now. It can use your calendar, right? And you can be like, hey, help me think about how to prioritize my week. That's great. Right. There's already stuff out there that can help you find like do scheduling. I mean, that's been around for a long time, like an assistant that can just be in a chat thread but you have to curate your calendar. Um, if you're looking for something that's, for instance, going to like maybe give you daily summaries, like I think this is another like I wake up and before, as I get to my desk and I think about my day, not even just prioritizing, but like what's coming up in more of a narrative flow instead of me like reviewing my calendar, going back through notes. Those are things that you can set up and they can become actually pretty reliable. Um, I'm really not a for AI being like a replacement for the actual considering the interactions, just because again, you might be surprised and you don't want to be surprised with the wrong email, right? Or the wrong
Right.
thing.
Exactly. Exactly. Is
Yeah,
there any final thoughts or you'd like to
Yeah.
say?
Go ahead, guys. I'll add one more thing, but go ahead, Saeed.
sorry, just to that question, I'll give you another real world example. I think, I not a good habit. Sometimes I order DoorDash or Grubhub, food delivery. And if there's an issue, you get sent to an AI bot immediately, right? But it's often the case that you will then be handed over to a human being, right, at some point. So it's not either or. These things are basically doing pattern recognition. So if it's a simple kind of pattern recognition question, like where is my order? That's an easy kind of pattern recognition thing for an AI bot to do. It just goes, sees where the driver is and so on. But my order was late. I want a refund. That's usually when the human being gets kicked in, right? Because that's a judgment call, right? The AI bot can't tell you the right answer for what was late. And the AI bot can't tell you how much to give you a credit for how long it was late. That's when a person has to intervene and say, yes, this is reasonable request about timing. And $5, $10 probably seems reasonable, so on.
Um, and so let me just address two questions that I think have been here, and I want to get real practical. Is like, and Vince did a good job of this in the chat too, but best models, if you're really wanting to know how I use them, my opinion, OpenAI thinks the best at generating images. I think it's the most artistic and things like that. Like actually, if you want to make branding content or you're a designer and you're thinking creatively, I think it's the best for that. I think Claude is the best for like actually giving like advice and written recommendations, more almost like having someone who, synthesizes like different pieces of information and tells you about it accurately or gives feedback on something. Anything where you're like looking for written strategic advice, I think Claude. And I think Gemini, Google's for anything that's like documents and data extraction, just because Gemini is really built in the context of like Google Docs and Google Drive. And it's been fine-tuned to be like working with documents. So that's my quick take on like how the big players and which free ones to use for what, and even how I use them. On the side of like, how do I know? I'm seeing a lot of people putting, how do I know if I can trust the information? I want to start with a little bit of a answer to that. That's probably not your favorite thing to hear, but is I really think the truth. If you do not know how to validate the information, this isn't a good task for an AI. I'm just going to be honest, because you will be tricked possibly, because the really only way to validate, like the way I validate, somebody brought up like recommending ways to validate AI with citations of credible sources. Well, you have to ask it, well, what are your sources? Give me your citations. Then you need to go over to Google Scholar and you need to check that these are actual citations. I mean, my students have to do this. If they submit a citation that's fake, it could be an academic integrity violation. At the very least, I'm going to dock points off on them, because my TAs in the age of AI, that's what they're doing when they're grading now, like papers and stuff, is they're checking your citations are real. You should be doing that for yourself. If you're not doing that, I actually think then you're using AI in the bad way, right? And that gets to the task too. Like the information coming back, you're using the AI almost like an assistant, as we talked about. hey, my students go and do some research for me. They bring back the synthesis of it. I'm not a very good professor if I check none of that and I go, oh, thanks, students. I'm going to go put this in an academic journal now. I'm not, that's not being a very good expert, in my opinion. My job is to now have heuristics that go, okay, let me see, where did your research, what did it summarize? You know, I saw an article that contradicted once. Let me actually check that, right? They've ideally saved me a ton of time because they transcribed interviews, they coded them, they came back with a literature review. Great. But if I don't even know what I'm looking for, I'm just trusting them blindly, then I'm not a very good advisor to them. They might as well be the research principal. And that's what you don't want. Your AI isn't the PI. It's not the principal investigator of your question, right? You are. So if you're asking it to do something where you have no knowledge, it's like what I'm talking to my sister about right now. She thinks she needs her foundation repaired at her house. I go to her house. I'm like, you do not need your foundation repaired. I'm like, there's nothing wrong here. Some plaster fell off the wall. But a guy came and told me that I should probably get a foundation repaired and it's going to cost me $15,000. Well, that guy wants to sell you something for $15,000 and you don't know what you're looking at, right? And that's the same thing with the AI. The AI can give you a very alluring, it feels like it knows, but if you don't know what even a good answer looks like, I hate to say it, don't use AI. Go find a trusted expert, go do some research first, then use AI to start doing the task. The AI can also help you with the like, where should I start with where to read? What should I read? Blah, blah, blah. It can be a great help for you for that. Super good. But if you don't know what the task actually looks like, then I hate to say it, you're not going to be in a good place to decide if it's accurate. You got to have some background expertise that you're drawing from, or some critical thinking skills, or some research process, or something.
So,
Well, I
Vincent,
want to thank you.
anything on that? Does that feel right?
well, I was gonna chime in with one small thing, and I know you need to wrap up. But from a more practical aspect of what if I'm doing something that I'm not sure about, is when you're prompting these models, don't give it deterministic language. Don't ask for the right thing or the wrong thing. Tell it what you're trying to do. So if you are learning about a new subject, and to Mike's point, well, if you're learning, that's not a deterministic thing where you're like, hey, find me the best X, Y, and Z. If you say, find me sources to explore, to read, it's going to do that quite well, actually, right? I think what Mike's saying is that you don't want it to make judgments about those sources, etc., right? So use it as like you should have the same amount of skepticism when you read these results as you did in Google about 15 years ago, where it was kind of a Wild West. And you're like, do I trust any of these sources? And then you would kind of put on your thinking cap. Is this guy a professor? Is this person an expert, etc., right? So if you were to kind of just rewind your mind back, 15, 20 years ago when the internet was new, when you always had some healthy skepticism, whether that's Wikipedia, things like that, if you apply that model to large language models, this is something you've already done, done it many times, then that's basically the safeguard is your discernment, your intelligence. Like if I'm learning about something, yeah, there's going to be it is useful for that, but identify things. Don't make it deterministic. Don't ask for the right specific answer because the way the models are trained, they're always trained to give you an overconfident answer. But if you don't ask for something where it wants to do that, you're going to get a much better result.
Thanks so much for your presentation today, Mike. We appreciate it very much. Thanks, Vince and Say, for your input on it as well. We really appreciate it. It gave us a lot to think about, right? And how we're going to put it into positive practice for our nonprofits. So the next session of our Nonprofit Leadership and Engagement series will be Wednesday, February 25th at noon with Faith Collins from the Southwestern Pennsylvania Commission and Joanna Pro from the Department of Community and Economic Development talking about state and federal funding opportunities. Yes, there are still some available. Thanks to all those who participated again, and thanks again to Mike for the outstanding presentation, giving us a lot to think about. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to the foundation, and I hope you continue to have a great day. Thanks so much.